During COVID, like everybody in 2020 were faced with sitting down in like whether it be your room or at home and faced with who you are as a person. The cultural background that we do have has really influenced a lot of the designing that I do. Going to Ghana in 2010, being there for the World Cup at the same time really made me realize like just how big it was. Being able to consider like cultural perspectives, how you can build different products with techniques and forms that like people from our country would or from other countries would. Regardless of how good you think you are, and you may be really good at whatever it is you're doing, understand that you can always get better. You're not the best version of yourself at this moment, and seeing what is needed to become the best version of yourself is something that you should always maintain, and it'll keep you going.
Welcome to Bridge to Self, where we spotlight the stories of second and 1.5 generation Black Americans. I'm your host, Ben Arthur. Super excited to be joined by my guy, Max Prempeh. He is a close family friend, essentially like a cousin, so to speak, but fellow second generation Ghanaian. He works in the sports product design space, and he's kind enough to join me to kind of discuss his journey, his story, his cultural roots, everything in between. So, Max, it's good to see you, man. How's everything going?
You as well. Doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Doing good, doing good.
Good.
Um, so let's kind of hop right in. So, I mean, obviously, second generation Ghanaian, right? But what do people need to know about, I guess, your cultural context at home to understand who you are as a young man in America today?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say if anything, like we all kind of, we grow up in the house with a lot of these values that are taught, morals and things that are kind of held within and a standard that our parents kind of hold us to that allows us to not only stay within the lines of what's wrong and what's right, but to kind of grow up and become, people that can contribute to society. And I think that kind of molds how all of us contribute in our own ways, regardless of the industry that we're trying to work in. A lot of those principles that, kind of rely upon heavily on just, being an upstanding person and kind of representing yourself as well as your culture in those different areas is something that kind of stands still today as well.
So what are you mentioned being kind of an upstanding person, but I guess what are maybe some of those other values that were instilled in you that you kind of carry with yourself to this
Yeah,
day?
for sure. I'd say one of the biggest ones is just consideration.
Mm,
Consideration of not just yourself, but of others. Understanding where people are coming from. And, not necessarily putting other people first before yourself, but really understanding that in order to successfully do anything, mainly speaking in terms of like group work or just in my field, like designing products for people, you're considering the person that you're actually doing this work for or doing the work with rather than just yourself and what you would like. So that's one of the biggest things that I would say consideration for sure. But also just just being genuine. If for people that don't know much about those from Ghana, most people that you meet from Ghana will be really genuine and nice people, unless you give them a reason not to be.
not to like you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's pretty tough to do. So, like generally speaking, like that's always been my demeanor and things. I mean, I'm pretty calm and reserved in most cases, and so like I try to, take a lot of those things and like translate them to everything that I do. Another thing that I'd say we were all raised to be is extremely like hardworking, like taking everything that we do pretty seriously. Whether it's sports, whether it's school, whether it's like your career, like that same mentality that we were kind of raised to like maintain is like easily transferable to whatever it is that we've done.
The point you made about consideration was a good one, and I think that kind of goes into the idea of service a lot, and I want to touch on that later when I'm going to bring up specifically questions that kind of about what you do in the sports uh, product design space. But
Mhm.
kind of before we get there, though, just the duality of kind of people like us living in America when you're second generation, in our case, second generation Ghanaian, but you're
Mhm.
also Black in America,
Yeah.
and kind of navigate. What has that kind of been like for you? Or I guess maybe how has that evolved over time in terms of how you've looked at yourself? Because I think for me, it was something I kind of struggled with at first, and then it
Yeah.
was a case where I was looking at myself more as just a regular African American, and then I got older, then I started thinking of myself more as a Ghanaian American. It's kind of evolved over time,
Yeah.
because of the different environments I've been in.
For sure.
But
For sure.
for you, what was that like?
Yes, I mean, like, going to school pretty young, I think like it was pretty common for people to like make fun of people that were African. That
Facts.
some seemed to be a commonality. I obviously acknowledged that there was no hiding from that. Like my name pretty much told it all. And I didn't really have an issue with it. However, like it wasn't something that I was necessarily like outwardly spoken about just because there weren't many that I knew growing up. Up until you get to those higher levels of education to where it's like middle school and now high school where there seems to be more people like you and you seem to be more expressive about it or just be more I guess you could say open to talking about it. In the past, I generally just wouldn't say anything, like and because I don't necessarily have an accent, there's no one like,
Yeah.
"Oh, he's African, this, that, and the third." I just sound like I'm American, until, they either hear my last name or, like, say my mom would come to school, and then they'd hear her speaking to me, and it's like, "Oh, yeah, I didn't know he was." So it's like one of those things. However, like, when you get to college, there's, like, so much more exposure, culturally, and it's like, oh, now there's, like, a large group or these associations of like African students and people that are also from the same country. So like you become more open to embracing that and just speaking about it and just having no problem with having to worry about anybody criticizing or saying anything like that. But like I'd say since the age of maybe 16, 17, I was just like, bro, I like if anything, it's who I am, and that's something that I've always been proud of. My willingness to speak about it has been more of a commonality just because I'm now in an industry that requires you to have those characteristics and traits that like can stand out compared to others. Like the cultural background that we do have has really influenced a lot of the designing that I do. Just being able to consider like cultural perspectives and
Mhm.
how you can kind of build different products with techniques and forms that like people from our country would or from other countries would. So that's just something that I've kind of learned to be, I guess, more outwardly open about as I've gotten older. And that's kind of been who I am today.
So kind of going off of that though, Max, like specifically, like you're describing it as almost a prerequisite, almost to kind of do what you do in the sports product design space. And I know specifically you've done like a lot of work with like kits and whatnot. Like I've
Yeah,
seen on your website, like you had a kit, a potential kit for like the Ghana national team,
yeah,
the like the Black Stars, the soccer team. And so
yeah.
I'm wondering though, like, I guess coming from a background like yours, how exactly does that give you a specific advantage though? Is it more so just the awareness of having stories that, knowing that there are stories like yours out there, because anyone can do a job, right? So is it more so the innate cultural sensitivity you have and the awareness to that you think serves you in a space like yours?
Yeah, I would say that for sure. I mean, like, growing up in our culture, there's just like a lot of things that you're exposed to outside of just like the cultural traditions that we tend to participate in. We're talking about like being exposed to sports that most people in America aren't watching in their everyday life. So soccer was that for me at an early age. Understanding how important it was to the nation of Ghana, going to Ghana in 2010, being there for the World Cup at the same time. really made me realize like just how big it was, watching the team reach its point. But then like as I got older, it was like, okay, you're watching these people in the industry design like jerseys for the World Cup, and they're designing it for like all of these African teams that, a lot of these countries have similar colors in their flags, so the uniforms are going to be similar in color. However,
Mm.
what these people don't understand is like these countries have differences in culture. Um, Despite us being in the same region, there's a differentiation between each and every one of our cultures that make us special, and those are things that I felt like needed to kind of be represented and told in those uniforms, and not just in Africa, but like in every other country as well. Like the World Cup is like the opportunity for people to learn and understand the significance of different cultures. As someone that comes from a culturally rich nation, like you understand just how important that is to other people as well. And that's something that you want to see be reflected in the uniforms. So when you don't see it growing up, it's something that you feel like you need to do, which is what kind of inspired me designing those kits. But then also makes me realize that if I can understand that there are valuable pieces and significance within each and every one of these different nations, then I can do that for other countries as well, as long as I am considering what those people value. So whether it be talking to people from those countries or going to that country in itself and visiting and embracing the culture myself, there are levels to it that I think are really important that many people don't consider. So I think understanding that doesn't happen unless I come from where we come from. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So what is the win for you being in your space? Is it just getting like an American, like someone from the Midwest or whatever, like just to understand, to open their eyes? Is that what you see as the win, right? Because there's a big storytelling component, right, in what you
Yeah.
do. And you're kind of highlighting that, right? In
Yeah.
terms of talking to people maybe from specific countries and making sure that culture is represented in that jersey and whatnot. So is the win, do you see the win as and the understanding on the part of the audience, the fans from
Yeah.
like is that what the win is for you?
The win is, yes, the win is that, in combination of like acknowledgement. There's a lot of people that will watch the World Cup, and outside of their nation, they probably don't care about other nations unless they're competing against said nation. For me, I look at it as like this is an opportunity, for you to understand why you see these other nations be as prideful as they are, like what makes them who they are, as well as understanding that, like you, say, take the American for example, watching the World Cup are going to be uninformed about a lot of these nations. You just looking at a certain uniform that has these different elements, you may not understand why they do. Um, Me being who I am, creating a product that enables me to tell a story about this nation, about these players, without having to say anything is something that I think is the win. And I think that's something that should be transcendent across different sports as well. In terms of design, for me, like the win is being able to very much, I guess you could say, express the significance and the elements of culture for all nations, um, and combining that with aesthetics to, provide a very like pleasing product that represents the athletes on the world's biggest stage. And that's something that I think kind of culminates the
At what point did you realize that that's what you wanted to do? That I mean, you have a unique story of your own, right? And as you've explained, it gives you an advantage, right? Just in the
win.
space you're in, just with the cultural sensitivity, cultural awareness. But at
Yeah.
what point did you maybe make that connection or that aha to where you realize that's kind of what you wanted to do is taking that cultural sensitivity or awareness or whatever you want to call it and take
Yeah.
it specifically into the sports product design space? At what point was that for you?
Yeah, I'd say during During COVID, like everybody
Mm,
in 2020, you kind of were faced with sitting down in like whether it be your room or at home and faced with like who you are as a person, what it is that you want to do, what your purpose is. I went to school for architecture initially,
yeah.
and I went back home during COVID, and just had a moment to really understand, is this what I want to do? And how passionate am I about it? And I slowly realized like I like it, but I don't love it. Um, One thing I've always loved is sports. And then I started thinking like, how can I find myself in this space and contribute greatly, and utilize my skill to do so. And like just being a huge fan of the sport of soccer, like I had always looked at certain uniforms and said to myself, "Oh, this is a really cool uniform. This is something that I think people will be wearing for a very long time." And I've seen uniforms where it's like, I don't think anyone's going to want to wear that for very long after this moment is done.
Yeah.
How can you create like uniforms that people feel really good about during the tournament, but then also something that like these people want to wear well after the time as well. So we're talking about like things that stand the test of time culturally. So like, and a lot of times we see that in footwear with shoes, like with the Jordan brand, whatever it may be. Sometimes we do see that with soccer uniforms, whether it be like a Brazil kit or something like just one of those iconic uniforms that you've seen like at a World Cup from a past, like a legend, like a club, like a nation's legend or something like that. But like being able to do that is what came to my mind at first. Like, how can I really find myself in that space to be the person that's designing these uniforms for these teams? And how can I do it in any sport possible, considering how big of a fan I am of sports in general?
You mentioned earlier how you were in Ghana during the 2010 World Cup, and I'm so jealous you got to experience being in Ghana during the World Cup. But
Yeah,
I'm wondering for you, and this is something I've always grappled with, right? Because like when growing up here in America, it's like you never really feel like you fit in with Black Americans, or at least let me speak for myself because I don't want to speak for your experience, but that was kind of my experience, right? You don't always fully
yeah,
relate to them, and maybe you act different, you carry yourself different, you talk different, whatever. But then
yeah,
when you go to Ghana, it's like you're not recognized fully as Ghanaian in a lot of ways, right? Because they say you're too American. It's
yeah,
like you're too African for the black people in America, and you're too American for the Ghanaians, right?
yeah.
And so I'm wondering if that's something you've experienced as well, and I guess maybe how you've dealt with that.
Well, so I've heard of that perspective from a lot of different people. I
Mhm.
think luckily I didn't necessarily experience that because I mean I grew up in Texas. So when we talk about Texas and playing like high school football or just playing sports, you're always going to be surrounded by
There are
Black
a lot of
Americans,
Nigerians
a lot of
too.
Nigerians, a lot of
Yeah,
like and like I think if I had an accent, it would be a problem to an extent. However, in a lot of cases, nobody knew I was African until I told them, or unless they saw my last name. So that was never really an issue for me. The only issue I had, I would say, is like there you when you go, like you said, when you go to Ghana, like the moment that they hear that you have an American accent, it's like, oh, you know the phrases that you
yeah,
get called
yeah,
whenever
yeah,
you're not like born in Ghana. So like
yeah,
those are the things that you have to like it's just gonna come with it. Like, I mean, you're gonna pronounce things differently because you don't have an accent. Um, and I don't think that's them saying you're any less African. It's just like,
yeah,
hey, he was born in America or he was born outside of Ghana. So we're gonna kind of identify him as this. However, they still embrace you as one of their own.
yeah,
In a lot of cases, it's like your family members that like they still have that love for you because they know that like your parents were raised with them or whatever it may be. So at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, he's still one of us. He just didn't grow up the same as we did. I think another thing that kind of contributes to that is like it'll be like where you grow up regionally. Honestly, I think being in the region that you grew up in, like I can see, like in comparison to Texas, it'll definitely be a little bit. a little bit
Be
more,
different, yeah.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So,
Uh,
like, yeah, like, I've heard that perspective quite a bit. Growing up, there were, like, a couple of jokes here and there, but I mean, like, everybody makes the jokes. That's just
yeah,
something that's, like, once you got to a certain age, the jokes, like, stopped, as well as, like, once they realized that you didn't care, it's just like, "Hey, that's just how it
yeah,
went." And then now it's like it's really interesting because now it's become, like, not necessarily a trend, but it's somehow become, like, really cool that you're African, so now it's not even an issue, it's just like, "Oh,
yeah.
he's African," but he did
Oh, that's kinda
but
exotic.
yeah, you know what I mean? But, like, also
Yeah,
it's like, because they don't necessarily hear it, then it's like it becomes one of those things where it's like, "Oh, I didn't know." Like, how would I have known, unless you, tell them or unless you, like, wear certain things that, like, kind of show it. So, I
yeah,
mean, things change, it happened, and now it's like you look back and you're like, I kind of wish that when I was younger, I was a bit more open about it, because at the end of the day, it's like, it's who you are, and you shouldn't be ashamed of who you are. You're gonna grow up in different places where people may not be familiar with it, and at the end of the day, like, that's what makes you unique. So yeah, it's been a really interesting experience for sure. I'd say over the last 5 or 6 years, like, I've met more people like me than those that aren't like me. And even those that aren't like me have it's gotten to the point where they've become even, like, fascinated rather than, like, been the ones to, like, shame it or say certain things or make jokes. So
yeah. You mentioning a moment ago about kind of the idea of being like ashamed about it a little bit, like
yeah,
as a kid, and I definitely resonate with that too. Like, right, because as you alluded to, like the environment I grew up in, and I think as a kid too, you just want to fit in, right?
yeah,
And whenever there were circumstances where we would wear our kente or our garb or what our dashikis, whatever it was, right? And I knew we would go to church, but then I knew right after we would go to the restaurant, and all the white people would see. Like I always felt like super like I felt really embarrassed about it just as a kid. I
yeah,
don't now, but I think that kind of comes with it too. But I think what you mentioned too about how it's kind of become trendy to be African now. And I've talked about this with my friends too.
yeah,
And we all kind of wonder like why that is. So I ask you, like, kind of why do you think that has changed to where like it was kind of people were getting clowned for it. Now it's like now if you have like the Nigeria flag in your bio on Instagram, it's like, oh, like that's kind of
yeah. I
like why do you
mean,
think that is?
honestly, I think it's like people starting off as like very ignorant, not knowing a whole lot. And then as they got older, starting to learn about it. Um, Also, like, with social media and like travel and people seeing like all these people going to Ghana during December and going to have fun, do all these things, that's something that's kind of shifted that. So as of late, you've seen a bunch of people going to Ghana. You've seen a bunch of people talking about Ghana, this, that, and the third. I think that has what's changed it. The exposure, people
Yeah,
realizing that it's not what people's initial perception of what Africa is.
yeah.
Once people start to realize that, I think those things kind of shift it all, and I think that's what's happened.
I think that's really cool though. Like for us, like being from Ghana, where Ghana has been like that connection to the continent for
Yeah,
Americans, right? Like no other country in Africa has opened themselves up to Black Americans or others across the diaspora in a way that Ghana has. Ghana has definitely like cornered that market, so to speak. And so I think that's really um, been cool to see. I'm wondering, just in your day-to-day life, like how Ghanaian do you feel? Like do you feel like just like American? Like do you even think about your heritage on like a daily basis? Like
yeah.
how does that shape your reality, I guess?
Um, I don't think there's ever been a point where I didn't feel like I was Ghanaian, where I didn't think about it, mainly because, like, growing up every day we were raised upon like the values and morals of like what our parents grew up on, but also we're eating the same foods that our parents grew up eating, as well as like following those same norms. So like when I got to college, I was thinking, oh, I can't cook. I have to eat like the food at school. I'll be separated from the culture until you realize there's a bunch of kids from the same countries at the school. So it's like, oh,
Mm.
okay, maybe not. Um, Now it's like the same thing, like being done with school in terms of like eating foods. I'm eating the same foods that I grew up eating. I don't really eat like I guess you could say quote unquote American food. Um, in my everyday life, like everything that I was raised up on morally in terms of values, all that it is, like those things have remained a constant. However, in my I guess you can say like in my graduate school experience, like being in Oregon, going to a school mainly with white people for the most part, there are times where it's like, oh, like not that I'm not African, but at the very surface level, I'm just black. I guess you could say
Yeah.
like to them. Um, and then like once they get to know me, it's like, oh yeah, I am black, but I'm not like Black American. I'm like a Ghanaian, and like this is what comes with that. This is like what represents me. This is what has influenced me. But like, I don't think there's ever been a point in time where like that wasn't in my mind. Like the way that I think about things and process things is built upon like how I was taught to like process and evaluate those things growing up from the
Yeah.
influences of our culture. So like that's always been a constant. I think.
Yeah, you did kind of describing your experience in graduate school
Yeah,
at University of Oregon in Portland is kind of like the way I grew up,
yeah,
right? Because that's why in my head, like I was trying to explain in the beginning, I felt just like African American because there were so few black people that it was like to differentiate between Ghanaian or Nigerian or Jamaican or Barbadian, like there was no there was not even enough black people to even think that way. So it was
yeah,
like you're just one of the black kids, but then it's like I'm acting in a way to where they're putting what they've seen on TV or whatever like onto me, right? And so
yeah,
I think that's really interesting that you bring that up.
yeah.
Um,
I
but
realized that like once I got to Oregon, it was like, oh, I knew it would be different. I didn't know it would be this different. Um, so like when I did meet black people, on face value, they're like, "Oh, another black person." Of course, I am a black man, of course. But then as they got to know me, they're like, "Oh, you're not like American." And then I'm like, "Oh no, I'm Ghanaian." And they're like, "Oh, okay, I know a couple of people from here, from there." But like, just being in that region, like you mentioned, the opportunity to meet other people from those countries is significantly lower.
yeah.
And then to the eyes of the the biggest demographic being white people in that region, to them you're just black. So there is no like opportunities to kind of become more detailed or specific about what it is that you are and where you come from.
Yeah. I think another interesting aspect to it too, just having Ghanaian parents is that and growing up here is like everything that black Americans have historically gone through, it's like you have to learn it, right, growing up here. Like I had a conversation with one of my previous guests about this. Like she was talking about how she found herself having to learn about black culture in America, right?
Yeah,
Like the movies or just with slavery or like uh how to respond like when you're around the police or whatever. Like I didn't have those conversations at home. What would maybe be a normal conversation for like an African American family who's generations of their family have been here. Like I didn't have those conversations at home, and there were so many. It's really situational, right? I
for
think
sure.
yeah, it really depends on the environment you grew up in.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about it, in most cases, like I grew up pretty quickly learning about
Yeah.
the culture and significance of like Black Americans, just because of the people that I went to school with, the sports that I played, the friendships that I built. And then I would say like the only thing that was new to me was like HBCUs. Like I didn't know
Yeah.
about HBCUs until maybe I was like 17, like my last year of college. Like I had just, and no one had told me about them until like all of my friends that were preparing to go to college would tell me what college that they were going to. And I would be like, oh, I've never heard of that. Or like, I've heard of one school, but I haven't heard of the others. I didn't know that there were like HBCUs were a thing. But in terms of like growing up and like handling yourself around police a certain way, the first instance that I like witnessed that, I knew like this can definitely apply to me because I look like them. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter like that I'm Ghanaian. Like I am still a black man at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So those are things that I have to be aware of. But then also like I think growing up as a kid, like you listen to music, you play sports, you do all of these things. All of those things are like extremely prevalent in black culture, and like that becomes a part of you as well because it's something that you think, although you're not like a black American, there's so much alignment in
Hmm.
the, I guess you could say, the details of both of our histories that do coincide,
Yeah.
despite the differences. So I think that's something that you take in favor of kind of learning, embracing, and understanding. Um, and it becomes a part of you as well. So like for me, like I think sports was the biggest like example of that, as well as music, just understanding like, yeah, this is what the culture, like black culture is. But then also you can recognize the influences from our culture in their music as well. So like at the end of the
Yeah.
day, like those things kind of merge together. And so that's kind
Yeah.
of how we become who we are and what it like represents us.
Yeah, for sure, and I think that's the beauty of Black culture, right? Like, I think so many times we just look at it from the Black American lens, but it's really a global Black influence on kinda everything we experience, right? And I think the point you make about sports is such a good one because, again, kinda coming up in the environment I did, playing basketball was really my exposure to Black American culture, I should say,
Yeah.
because I didn't go to school with all that many, but, like, the teams I played on or, like, just the kids in the city or the inner city, like, from the hood, like, the kids I played with, and that's
Yeah.
where I really learned where I started to learn that, and I think the point you made about the police thing is really good because at the end of the day, America doesn't acknowledge the complexities and the differences, right? If you're black, you're black. They don't think that this dude's from Compton, this guy's from Nigeria, and this one's from Jamaica. It's like it's all it's all the same. Internally, we can look at ourselves differently, but the way we're perceived by the world around us living in the US, it's they look at all of us the same. And so I think that's why for me it's given a really weird reality at times, right? Not exactly kind of knowing what you are. I mean, I guess you just have to have a strong sense of who you are, but because of the way the world is perceiving you and
Yeah.
what you know you are, but then there are different situations where you're different, right? Where it's like, okay, maybe you're in a Black American environment, or you're at a Ghanaian function, or you're just hanging out with your buddies from school who are all white and Asian. It's very situational, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like in most cases, like if I'm in a crowd of people with all black people, they're gonna like most people are outside looking in are gonna assume that we're all black Americans unless they start to hear maybe like an accent or like some music being played or whatever it may be that'll give them some type of inclination that there's maybe something more intricate about that group of people. But like you mentioned, like with sports, that was like the biggest thing for me. Like I already didn't have an accent. I was already amongst people that looked just like me. So like being embraced was natural. Um, and then like as you become more exposed to it, that's just something that you realize like, oh, like yes, I am Ghanaian, but I was also born in America. So like the American aspects of Black culture, along with what comes with just being Ghanaian, is gonna merge and
For
make
sure.
you that person. But like as you mentioned, yeah, like just being in different regions, it could definitely shift that perspective. I was born in Rhode Island. Had I stayed in Rhode Island, I think my perspective would be very
Be very
similar
different.
to yours.
Yeah,
You know what
yeah,
I'm saying? So like
yeah.
because I came down to Texas, I think that played a huge part in me being able to have like a really good perspective of that culture, growing up with it, and then like to this day, still kind of withholding that in who I am.
To go back, Max, about to kind of talk about what you do, right, in the sports product design space, and
Yeah,
clearly, like you have a passion for the storytelling component of it, right? The
yeah.
cultural appreciation that can come through in the kits or the sneakers or whatever it is. So, I guess in that space, what do you want to be in that space? Like, what's kind of when you look at your, I don't know if you look at like 5-year goal or whatever, but like,
Mhm.
what do you want to be in that in the sports product design industry?
Yeah, no, I definitely do. I kind of internally set like timelines in alignment with my goals, I would say. Um, Generally speaking, I want to be the person in charge or largely responsible for designing team uniforms. Doesn't have to be specific to just soccer. It can be, I would say, in most of the sports that I watch, I'd like to play a part in that. So basketball, soccer, football, track and field, any of it. But
Mm.
like when we talk about like my timeline at the moment, we have the World Cup coming. We have the, I'm sorry, we have the World Cup coming up next year, of course.
Yep, that's
But then
right.
we also have the Olympics coming in 2028. So being able to be on a team that designs uniforms for any of the competing teams in one of those sporting events, being a year from now or three years from now regarding the Olympics, that's what I would say is my goal in terms of time. Overall, like I said, like I want to be known as someone that designed some of the most like culturally impactful, iconic uniforms in the sport of soccer. I think that'd be one of the coolest things for me. And then being able to take those same skills and kind of transfer it over to different sports. I think I have the ability to do so in pretty much every single sport as long as I am knowledgeable enough about it, and understand who it is that I'm designing for. I feel like I'm capable of doing that.
Where can people go online or on social media to connect with you, learn more about you? And I know you're between jobs at the moment. If
Yeah.
anyone who's listening is in that space, how can they connect with you and I guess see your portfolio as well?
Yeah, so on Instagram you can follow me. It's Max Prempeh, Maxprempeh. That's my Instagram. And then my website is that same thing, with just an added X on the Max. There you'll find a lot of my work, design work, graphic design, a lot of different things that I'm doing, and working on. So yeah.
Okay. Awesome. And I guess last one for you, and I'll let you go, Max. But
Mhm.
this is something I ask all my guests at the end of every show, and it's
Yeah.
kind of broad. It's a little broad, so you may have to think a little bit. Just
Okay.
warning you.
All
But
right.
what is one thing you believe that people can do to get a step closer to unlocking the highest version of themselves?
Ooh, I would say I don't want to necessarily call it like humility, but I guess it would be like in a sense, understand that regardless of how good you think you are, and you may be really good at whatever it is you're doing, understand that you can always get better. I think that's something that, like I said, growing up playing sports, you look up to different athletes that like set an example of what it means to be great at something. And in their journeys, they all had to understand that regardless of how good they were, they had to get better and they had to continuously be working on themselves, because there are other people out in your specific industry that can take your place, um, and that are competing for the same job that you want. Um, so like being able to understand that like you're not the best version of yourself at this moment, and seeing what is needed to become the best version of yourself is something that you should always kind of maintain, and it'll keep you going and motivate you. Um, and just always be open to the opportunity to learn and get better. I think that's what I would say for sure.
I love it, Max. Well, thank you so much for your time. And for all you listening, whether it be via YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, I appreciate you guys. Thank you for tapping in, for continuing to support the show. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube. It's Bridge to Self, of course, at Bridge to Self, the number 2 between Bridge and Self on Instagram. And you can rate and engage and follow the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Let me know how I'm doing. All that feedback helps me to put out the best possible podcast and give you guys the best possible experience, whether you're engaging with the show via video or audio. So I appreciate you guys for doing that in advance. And you guys know the deal, every other Wednesday at 5 p.m. Central Time. But until next time, I'll see you guys soon. All right. Peace out.